Hello and welcome to the Z3 Project podcast. I am Rabbi Amitai Fraiman. I am the founding director of the Z3 Project, and this is our podcast. So for those of you who are joining us and have listened to our previous episodes, you will notice a difference in this upcoming season. In the past, we did more one-on-one, long-form conversations with leaders and thinkers and activists and practitioners. And in this season, what we're doing, we're trying out something different. We're trying always to iterate and grow. And we are bringing together more than one expert at a time to mimic what we do at our conference, which is having sometimes opposing or complementing perspectives and ideas about any given topic. So this time around, and I'm very excited about this new format because it kind of gives us an opportunity to hear a little bit more and cover more ground in every given conversation. So in this first conversation that we have, we're going to cover the topic of Israel education, and I'm incredibly blessed to have join me today two friends and mentors. The first is Rabbi Dr. Laura Novak-Winer. She's the director of the Master of Educational Leadership Program at HUC-JIR, Rhea Hirsch School of Education in Los Angeles. And Laura is really an expert. She teaches courses on pedagogy, classroom, and organizational culture, and leading change. She really is a thought leader in this area. She spoke at our previous Z3 conference, and she's really, truly phenomenal. The other guest we're really excited to have join us today is Robbie Gringras. Robbie, famously coined this term of hugging and wrestling with Israel. And he is a British-born Israeli living in the Galil, in the Galilee. He works in education. He's also a performer. He's a writer. And he's now the co-director of For the Sake of Argument. And it's a practice, it's an organization that really helps communities and learners to kind of engage with the practice of healthy argument throughout the Jewish world. They travel the country. I've seen them in action. I went through their workshops. Truly a phenomenal educator with a lot of insight and a lot of experience in this. So this conversation between these two master educators covers the question of Israel education in this moment, post-October 7th world, the past 19 months. But not only, looking back a little bit retrospectively, what we have done in the past and has worked and what hasn't worked, what we might need to do moving forward. We dabble in questions of theology and belief and practice and the meaning of all of this and the goals of education. And it is quite an enriching conversation. I truly and thoroughly enjoyed it. You can read more about these speakers in the description of this podcast. And I highly recommend following their work. They're truly phenomenal. And I really hope that you enjoy this conversation. This is the Z3 Project podcast, the episode about Israel education in the classroom and out. Take a listen, share, follow us, and let us know what you think. Hi, and welcome to the Z3 podcast. I'm Amitai. It's great to be here. I'm joined by two friends and, dare I say, mentors as well. We have Laura Novak-Winer and Robbie Gringras. Their full bios are in the description of the episode, but they're both supreme Jewish educators, focused very much as well as on Israel education. They're veterans in the field. I've been doing this for a very long time, and it's just great to be here. And I look forward to this conversation to get their sense and a feeling of what's going on now in the field, a little bit of a retrospective conversation of what worked in the past, looking at this moment we are in, and forward at what might need to change. And I know it will be an illuminating and interesting conversation. So thank you, Robbie. Thank you, Laura, for joining us. Let's get started. So we'll jump right into it because people are eager. I think in this moment there's a lot of nervousness around the question of Israel education, in particular post October 7th. I will say that, there's a lot of conversation and arguments within the community around what is the right course of action. There's different approaches that have been tried for a very long time. One approach is maybe around how do we develop a love for Israel and for the people and for the culture and the language without asking any questions. And another approach has been maybe that didn't work so much, and we need to reevaluate some of the underlying assumptions that we've had going into these conversations. And so maybe there's a different way in and kind of showing more of what's going on in a more, we'll say, less rose-tinted glasses. And there's a lot to unpack in that. I know that's kind of a point of departure of where we are in this moment. And so, I'll let that kind of percolate in the background. I mean, I want to start with just like very straightforward. If you can each make a statement from your perspective, what is the goal of education? Because I think that is where we should really start of everything in that perspective. So I'm going to ask it like in a very straightforward way. Laura, I'm going to start with you, and let's say, what is from in your perspective, as an educator, someone who trains educators, what is the goal of Israel or Zionist education today?
Thank you, Amitai. It's great to be here with you and in conversation with you and with Robbie. I think that the goal of Israel education needs to be to help our learners of all ages come to know Israel in a really complex, nuanced, diverse way. And that is not just about knowing facts about Israel, but is about knowing what Israel means to them theologically and spiritually, knowing what it means to them in terms of their own sense of who they are as a Jew and where it fits within their framework of their Jewish life. And knowing what it means to be part of a broader connection, not only to the land of Israel, but to also the state of Israel and the people of Israel, who are a global community, not just the residents or citizens of Israel. So really, it's about knowing Israel.
So that's I'm hearing you correct. That's very resonant, and I think you're using the word knowing very, very carefully and intentionally. So maybe you want to share a little bit more why you're choosing that word specifically.
I'm choosing that word very specifically because I think that the goal of Ahavat Yisrael, of building love for Israel, is actually a misalignment between what we can do as educators and what outcomes need to be. We cannot teach a specific towards a specific emotion and guarantee that that's even an outcome. We can't guarantee anything in education. And so I think that Ahavat Yisrael, love of the people of Israel, love of the nation of Israel and the land of Israel, is an important Jewish value, but it is not an educational outcome. And it might be something that develops out of a deep knowing of Israel, but it isn't something that we can guarantee. So I've chosen the word knowing, and in Hebrew we say yediah, because of actually grounded in the history of Israel education, coming from pedagogies that were created in the beginnings of the modern Israeli state, and pedagogies that were used then by educators in Israel to help new immigrants and help newly born Sabra children come to know the land of Israel. And they called that pedagogy Yediat Haaretz, which today is called Land of Israel Studies, but it's really about getting to know the land. And I think that we need to align ourselves with that pedagogy and think about Yediah, knowing Israel, both the land, the state, the people, the history, the theology, is a greater alignment with what we should be doing with our learners outside of the state of Israel.
So to paraphrase a little bit there, so the goal is to know, because we can't necessarily, and we can't guarantee, of course, I feel like I have to say this caveat, we can't guarantee anything for anything, but to the extent that we can try at least to work towards an outcome, the outcome is if we try to create an outcome that is tied to an emotion, we're certainly not going to succeed, but if we at least try to educate for a level of knowledge, of knowing, and there's more to say there for sure, and I see Robbie's about to say what I think he's going to say, and if not, then I'll supplant it later. But very much so. You're saying it goes back to this traditional understanding of Yediat Haaretz, which has been, when I grew up in Israel, that was the name of of all the courses that we took when it came to learning Israel. And I think it's derived from Robbie might know, you might know, I don't know. But there's the statement in avat haaretz b'yediat haaretz, right? You have to know
Yeah,
the land
exactly.
without. And then, of course, let's talk about the biblical Hebrew of ladat, which is, of course, all connected to this phrase. So thank you, Robbie. From your perspective, if we're looking at like the goal of Israel education, you've developed, Laura is in the setting of training educators and teachers through HEC. You developed for decades, you've been in this space of educating, but you also developed a very specific methodology and approach and pedagogy for this. And so from your perspective, looking at it from that prism, what would be the goal of Israel and Zionist education in your mind in this moment?
Thanks, Amitai, and lovely to be on the same call together with you as well, Laura. So a couple of things. First of all, what I got from when Laura talked about knowing the land is, of course, that that's also a word for intimacy, right? So Adam yadat Chava, Adam knew Eve, and he didn't write a dissertation. A child emerged. So there's something about intimacy, which is a deeper and more complex kind of relationship than which might include love, but not necessarily. But as for the goals, look, I think first of all, it's really important for us to clarify the difference between Zionist education and Israel education. My perspective is that Zionist education can take place and can be taught without necessarily taking on board what's happening in Israel today. But Israel education is one of those complicated things because it's both historical and current affairs. It's both knowledge-based or information-based and relationship-based. So it's as I've been talked about, the difference between a clock and a cloud. A clock you can take to pieces and put it back together exactly the same shape that it was before. But Israel education is a cloud which is constantly changing its shape. And I often say that the goal of Israel education is for Jews to find their own answers to the 4 questions that the state of Israel was established to address. I'd say that the 4 questions that the state of Israel was established to address emerge in the penultimate line of the Hatikva, the national anthem, to be a people free in our land. And the 4 questions are: to be or not to be is the first question, of survival. The second question is about collective identity. Who are we? And what does that mean? And how do we relate to people who aren't us? The third question is about freedom, collective freedom, democracy, rights that we give for ourselves and to others. And in our land, the nature of the land, the borders of the land, the spiritual, historical, geographical location. And those are 4 questions which I think Israel came to try to provide a specific answer to. And I think the work of education is for each one of us to check out, how do I think that question is being answered? How could it be answered better? Are there other places it can be answered better? That would be, I would say, the goal.
Yeah. So,
and I think in answering that, you get to your intimacy.
Yeah. Okay. So just to kind of ensure that I understood you correctly, you're saying that if we teach, so the goal is to not very dissimilar from Laura saying that level of intimacy, ladat, right? And that's what I knew. I can see where that was what I thought you were going to say, to invoke the biblical. That's why I kind of said I didn't want to.
I was holding myself in.
Yeah,
I was hoping you wouldn't say it.
No, I had a little bit, but from that intimacy, whether or not love emerges is a separate question, but it's certainly not the goal. But is that level of intimacy, that knowledge, knowing of, and from your perspective, is like you use that, you're using that line in the Tikva as a prism through which these are the 4 questions, and these are the areas in which we need to be addressing when it comes to Israel education. But I find interesting in both of you, because I there's a lot that we're not going to be able to cover in this conversation, unfortunately, right? But I think what we're bringing into this already is we're already responding. The two of you certainly, and this is my sense as well, is that we're responding to this expectation of love as the outcome, right? And that is certainly something we hear from a lot of people in the advocacy space, perhaps, or a lot of folks who are nervous around a layer of relationship, maybe even as a response to some mid 2000s slogans that were thrown about "you lied to us" about Israel, etc. And we're already okay, so we have to skip. So that tells us that we've been doing something differently. So maybe as a helpful contrast, we can talk about how you've seen the evolution of this field or this area of Israel education. So now we know it's about intimacy and the level of knowledge. But what was it like maybe 20 years ago, 10 years ago, that you felt was dramatically different? Whether or not you were in that mindset or not, right? But you could at least tell that there was a difference. And we'll go. I mean, I don't go back. Laura, you first. Robbie,
Sure.
you're second. But until
I mean, I think that this goal of Ahavat Yisrael, of building love, has existed much longer than 20 years ago. It actually goes back to the beginnings of Israel education in the 1950s here in the United States. I'm speaking here in America, in the United States. And it has been perpetuated over these years, and it began with the beginning of the state, with a sense that American Jews needed to learn to be advocates for and supporters of this nascent nation, right? And that there was this sense that American Jewry needed to be there to stand in support for Israel and advocate for Israel, give money to Israel. There was a time in which there was a big push for making Aliyah to Israel. And so this idea that American Jews needed to learn to develop a connection to Israel has been there since the beginning of the state. And I think that it's been in recent years that we have gotten into these difficult conversations about, well, why do I need to support Israel when I'm an American? Or we think about Dr. Sivan Zakai's work in longitudinal work in studying children and how they understand Israel. And they've come to see that Israel is the title of her book, their second favorite country.
right.
They still have a lot of questions about, why do I actually need to love this country when I don't live there? Or why do I need to love this place that I've never, ever even seen? And so I think that this just sort of reiterates for me this misalignment that we have been experiencing, that we need to love Israel, but we haven't been told why. And that culturally, the American Jewish community has come to say that it's a binary, that either you love Israel or you don't, and that there's no sort of gray area in the middle to say, well, I care about this place, I care about these people, I care about this land, I care about all its residents, right? And how do I do that and at the same time be critical of what's going on, or question what's going on, or consider what that means for me as a Jew when I see my Jewish values that are coming into play in the in what's going on in the nation of Israel. So I think that we've gotten to even before October 7th, we were at a moment in which we needed to be thinking differently about Israel education, and Robbie has helped us do that with the introduction not only of these 4 questions, but even before that, just opening up the idea that we can both hug Israel and wrestle with Israel, right? But now all the more so since October 7th, we need it even more, right? That people aren't even willing to hug at the moment, some people, and are only wrestling, and some people are only wrestling or only hugging and not wrestling. And I think finding this space of knowing is going to help us with that.
Robbie.
Nice one. Here's the funny thing. I don't think much has really changed. I first wrote the first iteration of the article, Hugging and Wrestling with Israel, was in 2004. And even back then, the challenge in the community was, A, to take it on board in any way, but also the ability to hold on to the word and. And pretty early on, it became interpreted as hugging or wrestling, and one does one or the other. I always thought it was something about American football, that you have defense or offense, and you don't have midfield players like we do in what you'd call soccer. But back in 2004 and 5, what seemed to be the challenge was that that the learner was unable to hold, and the parent and the teacher was unable to hold critique as a form of connection. That critique was always seen as, when we further went into the image of, if we're talking wrestling and hugging, so you can't do wrestling from far away, and a wrestler is not the referee who's pointing from outside. And also, if you're wrestling, then the chances are you're both critiquing and being critiqued. A wrestler can lose their footing as well. I would love to say that, having written that article and having done the wonderful work with Makom, which was at the Jewish Agency, and together with Johnny Ariel and the whole team, that we changed nothing. I don't think much changed. I think the main thing that changed is that Israel changed. And what's happened, and because I see Israel education as to do with what's happening in Israel and not just the history or the intentions of the place, Israel has was already shifting 20 years ago, and has shifted further and further to an understanding of Jewish values, which are very different from what American Jewish values are. That has been one of the funny things. It always makes me giggle when with respect, Laura, when a lot of educators talk about Jewish values, and I'm looking at them and I'm saying, you mean the Jewish values that Obama told you have? and let me introduce you to a few people in the government right now and hear their understanding of what Jewish values are. And they are as rooted in the texts as those who understand liberal values emerging from Jewish values. And Israel's changed a hell of a lot, and therefore has increased the challenge for any kind of connection when Jews in America understand themselves as holding a set of having a moral stance on many, many things, which the majority of Israelis do not hold. They have a very different stance. And by the way, they also have a critique of American Jewry. It's fun stuff.
It's always fun stuff. So
I would also say that American Jews have changed, right?
Yeah,
like being Jewish in America has changed over and continues to change. And we're not in a very happy place at the moment. It's very hard to be Jewish in America at the moment. So, and I think that is also informing this moment that we're in.
Totally.
And that there are values that everybody, whether in Israel or here, we're trying to live out, that we're seeing our intention with each other. And we're people are navigating how to live in those tensions and figuring out which values they want to prioritize over others, and that's part of the tension that we see in the communities.
Right. Yeah, so we're seeing, there's America has changed, Israel has changed, Israelis have changed, American Jews have changed. I have some questions around,
You haven't
similar to where
changed
we
much, Amitai. You look exactly the same.
You don't know me 20 years ago, Robbie, but but I lost my train of
I
thought.
put you up. I'm sorry.
I'm just not like pushing whatever, but no. What I was gonna say is that and this connects to the beginning of the conversation, though, right? Like there's this assumption that and we go back to this, and I remember even sitting as a rabbinical student. I was in part of this track. They took us to APAC, and for the policy conference, it was very, very weird to be an Israeli at APAC. It was really mind-boggling in many, many ways. But one of the things that I kept on struggling with, honestly, and this I think has something that's like a through line here, is like this idea that it's a values-based. We love to talk about the values-based connection, but the value, like and I'm not the expert in like what's a value, but like even the difference between love and knowing is already an evolution of our understanding, right? So like if it's not about shit, like is the motivation around, are we really need to be in a connection or in a conversation because we have shared values? Is that really the motivation? Or is there something that's deeper that motivates us? Because the way Laura was talking about Ahavat Israel, right? Like for most people, Ahavat Israel, of course, Israel is the country, but we know that Israel refers to a whole set of things that isn't just the country, right? The land, the people, and so the question then is, right? If the challenge is coming up around this perception of shared values, okay, then and this can go in two ways, but let's start with one, which is if it's not in the shared values, how do we then talk about a relationship? That's part one. And then related to that is then what is so like back to the goals, and why are we even invested in this relationship and in educating about Israel and this whole approach of Israel education? So Robbie, I'm going to start with you this time because
Sure.
I thought Laura twice, and I'm keeping track up here.
For now, I've never really thought it was about values. Being a cynical British and Israeli, I tend to be more cynical about that sort of stuff, but also because it's not how I've understood Jewish peoplehood ever, and it's not how I've understood Torah, to be honest. Maybe they have this, do they call it constructionist kind of approach? What I read in a text says a lot more about me than it does necessarily about the text. And so we'll find the values that we're looking for quite often, or we'll emphasize the values that we're avoiding. And I believe that Jewish peoplehood has to be about, let's call it community. And in communities, not virtual communities, but in real life communities, you got different generations, you got different opinions, you got different lifestyles. You have very different, I believe, or let's put it like this, that what if we were to say that Jewish peoplehood is a value in and of itself? And then what we're looking at is a clash between values rather than a choice, right? And that the moment we say that a Jewish community or a togetherness or a belonging of the Jewish people is of value in itself, then we're automatically going to be dealing with juggling, struggling with tensions between values in order to remain in community. But the moment we start saying that being Jewish or being Israeli or being a human being is based only and solely on what I think is the right thing to do, we narrow ourselves, we narrow our existence, and we narrow our connections to other people. And so my belief is that the value stuff gets in the way. And so I think that the way to go would be to be pushing for the value of, I'll tell you another value which rarely comes up in the values conversation, self-preservation, security. right? That's a value too. And quite often in the conversations, for example, about Israel, and in particular over the last 19 months, that's one of the values which is also at play. Quite apart from the values deleter, which is called fear, which is something that both communities are dealing with now. So yeah, I devalue values.
Yeah. No, it's good. Yes.
You're challenging me, Robbie, in a good way.
With love, you know
Because
that.
of course, always. Um, both as a Jewish educator and as a rabbi,
Oh
my
boy,
like
I've blown it.
my core like purpose, my why for why I do this is because I believe that Judaism offers guidance on to us on how we live our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. And to me, that's about not only about studying history and our texts to see how our ancestors lived their lives and learning from them, but also around values, right? That what our people did when they were settling the land of Israel, both in the Tanakh and in the 1930s and 40s, right? And today is all sort of grounded in values. So you're challenging me to think about what does it actually mean to be taking values out of the equation.
Yeah.
Especially if we're in a non-Orthodox world, right? Because if I were to
Mm-hmm.
speak to any Orthodox Jew, and certainly ultra-Orthodox Jew, again, they'd certainly agree with you that being Jewish is a way to live your life and a guidance
Mm-hmm.
for the right way to live your
Mm-hmm.
life. And it's but they got different ways of gauging that.
Yeah, but I think what's interesting here to further unpack. I mean, I do, we're this specific, as much as I love this conversation, right, and I do, and we're talking about like Israel education. I want to steer back there slowly. We'll get back to that, but to this point of values, I think that Robbie, to your point, and Laura, this is where I want to get back to this question about like, the values that drive us or the way we're supposed to live. If you ask the Orthodox or the ultra Orthodox, there is a theological arc to the values. The values will lead to something, right? When, what, how, fine, but there is an arc. And so the question then, not to put Laura on the spot here of like unpacking a whole theological worldview and whatever, but narrowing it down to like to Israel, even Israel education. Okay, so aliba de Laura, right? And your shita, okay, so there is a reason to do Israel education because of the values. So why what is the value there? If indeed, we're not going to live there, we're not going to be part of that community, and we don't have a lot of family there at this point. I mean, not me, but I'm saying somebody, not anyone in this call in particular, but what are the values that drive there? So back to like, what is the purpose, the goal? Like, okay, so why?
I mean, I think actually to go back to what Robbie said earlier, I think that peoplehood is a value, right? We are a global Jewish community, and related to that, either we're all mishpacha, we're all family, and we care about each other, and we should be present for and with each other, or we, talk about Klal Yisrael, all Kol Aravim, Kol Yisrael Aravim Zebazah, right? We're all responsible for each other. That we have whether we live there or not, we should be caring about the people who are our family, our Jewish family in Israel, and care about the enterprise, the Jewish enterprise of the state of Israel, because it is part of us. But that gets to me and that's part of me and my theology, right? You said you weren't going to ask me to go there,
You're
but I'm
I'm open.
going
I'm
there.
always game for a theological conversation. I'm just saying this.
I'm just going to go there, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's so interesting that the last, 19 months have put, have invited,
Yeah.
required, or demanded of so many of us to really examine what Israel means to each of us, whether we are in Israel or anywhere else in the world. And for me, it's been a huge sort of new understanding about my connection to the history of the Jewish people and the land. And it's been a huge theological sort of evolution for me to say, like, oh yeah, like I actually believe that, like, God gave me this land, me, the Jewish people, this land, and we have a history there. And that doesn't mean that it should only be ours, that we also share it with other people, and they should have a right to live there as well. Now we're getting into politics, but
Not necessarily. No,
not
that could be.
necessarily, right? But so, and to me, that's been like, as I've been thinking about this process of what does Yediat Yisrael mean, and defining it for the world. I'm also been going through my own personal process of what does knowing Israel mean for me, and that theological component has been a big piece. So I don't know how I got there, but I think that I'll just leave it there.
No, you were. I'm Robin. Just
Yeah.
to say that in a way, so maybe make sure I understand and bring it back to Robbie, and that let him have a chance to respond to some of that and the questions at the top is basically saying, because the question was, if it is from a values perspective and there's a reason for this education, then for from your perspective, your approach and yourself, and also in your roles, when you educate about Yediat Haaretz and about the connection, yes, it's because we value that there's a value of holding that mindset, living in that consciousness of being part of a global people, and that means
Right.
including that Israelis, what's going on there,
Right.
and this is kind of like the October 7th impact. Or one of them is that, like, it forced you and other educators from your perspective to contend with some deeper questions, and so that adds also, like, yes, there is a theological element here that kind of ties into all that. That's Robbie. So okay, good. So Robbie, so they're just like respond to Laura and what brought that out for you as well. But just the question that I asked her, right? And the values, if the values is the driver, I know for you, you devalue values as a proud British Israeli or Israeli Brit. I don't know what where the hyphen is. The and, the or.
I'm fluid.
Yeah, fluid. But there is, so if I heard you correctly, you're saying that's the community, the being able to sit in community together is a value, and that includes it will evidently or inevitably include folks you disagree with in different life experiences and age-wise, etc. And therefore, we can educate around that as well. Is that a correct assumption? And if not, correct me, please.
That's certainly an element of it. I think there's also a practical element. This is the research that Alex Pomson et al. I think he wasn't alone in doing this, but one of the research that was done prior to a few years ago, looking at day school alumni. And finding a surprising correlation between a connection to Jewish peoplehood and a connection to Israel, and that one feeds the other in both directions. And I think that's I think that's at the heart of the work that we're doing, as that in order to understand who I am as a Jew in the world, at the very least, I need to take on board all the Jews in the world, and at least half of them are in Israel, quite apart from any connection to the land. I'm not sure about my theology, but so I'm not sure that the land was that God gave us the land, but I am sure that my story says that, and I and my people have been living that story for the last 2,000 years. But again, I'm not even sure that values are the right word, and the reason why I'm saying that is because there's something about finding the why or the choosing the values or prioritizing, which emphasizes choice, right? Which is a very American thing, and it's fantastic. And I'm not sure that all of Judaism is about choice. And I'm going back to Soloveitchik, who talks about Goral or Ye'ud. It's either our fate or our destiny, but it's not something that we've necessarily chosen. I think the relationship of American Jews to Israel is not something that they've necessarily chosen. That connection is there whether they want it or not. And the last 19 months have shown that. You are connected to what's going on in Israel, like it or not. Your choice is the attitudes towards it, or the way in which you want to understand it or gain knowledge of it. But at the end of the day, it's not choosing. And I think I remember, I think it was Rabbi David Inber several years ago was talking about how anti-Semitism is the greatest challenge to this understanding of Judaism, that it's based on my values that I choose. Because anti-Semitism is not something we choose. And yet it's part of who we are. And so I think that there's something deeper. Maybe it's theological, maybe it's something else, but I think that the connection to Israel is. And then the question is more, what's the nature of it? Do I reject it? Do I hate it? Like all parts of myself that I might inherit, and all parts of my family and all parts of the people that I'm connected to, like it or not. And then it's that's where I'm at.
Yeah.
Today, anyway, I'll probably change my mind tomorrow.
That's fine. Today we're recording. We'll have a follow up at some point. But I really appreciate that that distinction you're making about choice. I do think, by the way, it is impossible that for me, it dawned on me at some point, but it's hard for me to imagine, but nobody else has thought about this at any point. But I think there's a huge misunderstanding and misinterpretation of the chosenness of the Jewish people, right? Because I think that in Hebrew, the Am HaNivchar, right, it's a passive, it's savil. It's actually about the removal of choice, right? It wasn't Am HaOcher, it's Am HaNivchar. No one asked us, right? And it's not about, and we turned it into, we developed a whole theology of separateness and chosenness as an elevation, but for me, it's like, no, we just didn't choose this. Like, it's just as Robbie said. And it can't be that this is like some, I'm the first, like, I'm not, I'm a son of Olim, like how strong is my understanding of biblical Hebrew, right? But like this idea of Am Nivchar, it's like, no.
The idea that it's taking away choice is very nice. We are not the choosing people.
Exactly. And I got that from that, right? The Hartman distinction of the choosing and the chosen. I'm like, oh, obviously Nivchar, that's what it is. Anyway, but that's not the sidetrack. But the point saying that, like, how does that inform it? If we're not asked, if it's really not, if our agency around at least the existence of the relationship, right? I think that's a nice way to look at it. Like how much we build or just let it be, is an interesting perspective. And so it brings us back again, like, so how do we educate around that, right? We're assuming then that there is an existing relationship, like it or not, right? It's like you can turn up and off the volume, but right. But if you are in once you choose to be part of the community and actively live, right? And I think this goes back to something else that may be in the background here of like the goal of living a fulfilling Jewish life. And that includes a variety of things, right? Of being a civically engaged Jewish human in the world. But to the extent that we make the choice to start upping that volume of our relationship and our connection. And so the Yedi'ah, that part of the education, allows us to kind of explore the elements of it and chart our own path. Is that a fair kind of like statement to me? Do you feel that's reflective of where we are in this moment in this conversation? Yeah. Okay, good. So I want to not change gears a little bit. Laura kind of opened this up a little bit. Robbie touched upon this, but I do think we should zero in for a second, the October 7th, the moment or the impact of October 7th on your work and on your perspective, and what you're seeing in your colleagues when it comes to bringing Israel to the classroom or teaching about it and its people.
I think we're really at this inflection. I mean, we're at an inflection point in so many ways.
Yeah.
But I really think we are at this point of, I really appreciate your metaphor of the volume, right? Because, and I said this a little bit earlier, but I'm going to come back to it, that I feel like culturally, as an American Jewish community, we've either been like, it's on or it's off, right? Either you love or you don't.
Yeah.
And we've been like pushing people up against the wall on that and saying like, wait, you're not loving Israel. That's not loving Israel. And I feel like we're really at this a point where we need to really look very closely at that and see how especially young people, right? Because thinking about all of our high school students and college students, right? Who've had it very, very hard, are actually expressing love, or expressing, I'm going to take the word out, take that back. They are expressing a connection to Israel and a vision for Israel without it being love, but rather being deep concern about Israel living up to what they want it to live up to. And at the same time, also expressing fear about for themselves and fear for all the residents of the region, the Jews and the Muslims and the Christians and the Druze and the citizens of Israel and the citizens of Gaza. So it's not that their volume is off. It's actually high. It's on, and it's very high. But they're just not saying the things that the American Jewish community is like mainstream wants them to say, right? So this takes us back to the values. They're like, wait, you taught us that we are supposed to love all the human beings, welcome the stranger, right? Because we were once strangers in a strange land. And here we are, we're trying to be welcoming of all people. And we're shown there are people in Israel who are not being welcoming, right? So they're, I feel like we are really at this inflection point and needing to really see what the binary has become and move away from it.
Robbie, from your perspective, October 7th, the way it impacted.
But I think maybe this is just an Israeli perspective, but I have a feeling it isn't. I think that, look, we're 19 months since the initial attack, and I think there have been two stages in Israel's response and in Jews' response to what Israel's been up to. Right. On the one hand, there was the shock, horror, and response to the Hamas attack, and now we're in a slightly different space in that the way in which we're conducting the fighting in Gaza and the reasons for it and the justifications for it are far more, I'm going to put it, are far more grey and unclear. And of course, then with the lack of clarity comes the desperate need for far more clarity. So I think that's one thing. But I suppose I think that the challenge with Israel education since October 7th is that not everybody knew what Israel education was supposed to do before then. And now, so it's even worse, right? So, for example, was Israel, like Birthright said, was Israel supposed to be effectively a really effective way for teaching American Jews how to be American Jews? Was a visit to Israel in order to strengthen your Jewish identity or to strengthen your understanding of this different place? And if that's not clear, as in, am I learning about Israel to learn about me, or am I learning about Israel to learn about Israel? Then I've still got the question now, only, as you said, the volume's up and it's just hitting distortion. I think that we're also, that it feels like there's a lot of doubling down to what in my head never worked before, and I still haven't understood it, how it's supposed to work now. I never understood how Israel advocacy was ever a form of education. And I've also found it hard to see evidence that it's ever actually achieved what it's supposed to achieve. Right. So I think a little bit like going on. No, I'm not going to say this, but it
You
feels
can
like
say it.
it's
You can say it.
sometimes people go on demonstrations in order to bring about strategic change, and sometimes we go on demonstrations in order to go on demonstrations because it's something that at least feeds me.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a feeling of solidarity when I'm together with other people shouting about something, and I'm not clear what Israel advocacy does, because if it was supposed to reduce Israel hatred or connect, well,
Yeah.
it just keeps failing larger every time.
Right.
An element of that is Israel and what Israel's doing, but an element of it is it's a strange form of education, or it's
Yeah.
a strange form of enculturation, or building belonging and anyway. I don't know what's changed. I've got one big question that remains, and in our work, Abby and myself, for the sake of argument, our big challenge now is we're trying to work out young people, young Jews in the United States, how many of these people are now absolutely convinced that Israel is a bad place and a bad idea, right? As in, how many of these people are anti-Zionist in the pure, clear, conscious sense? They're clearly louder than they ever were before. I have a feeling they're larger than ever they were ever before, but it's very difficult to clarify that. Whenever research is being done, it seems to me, and again, I'm not a great expert in this, and I haven't been looking at a lot of the research, but it seems like every time there's research which says, there's about 20-30% of American Jews, of American Jewish college age, who are anti-Zionist now. 20-30%. And that's always either poo-pooed or the methodology is critiqued, but it seems to be a number which is coming up more and more. And if that's the case, then it feels like things have to change radically. And right now, sometimes I fear that we are, I've been in the game for over 20 years, as you know, and it's not like we're shutting the barn door after the horse has bolted. It's like the horse has been gone for years. It's had foals. The barn fell down 3 years ago, and we're still trying to shut the door. I fear that the game has totally changed. But I'm not sure what the numbers are. It could be that I'm just hearing that I'm hearing the extremes much louder than they ever were before. Or it could be that the middle ground really has emptied out, and that there are more at either extreme of the wrestle or huggle
You knew what you meant. Laura, do you have thoughts on that part of Robbie?
Well, I would say that that advocacy is not education. They are very different things. Advocacy might be something that a learner decides to take on as a result of their education, but it is not necessarily, I don't think it should be the outcome of our Israel education. That's what Israel education of the 1960s and 70s and 80s was a lot about advocacy. But I think we need to really separate them. Look, the Jewish community the American Jewish community was never 100% in consensus around Israel, around politics, around the government. And yes, it is louder now because it's, I think part of it is this younger generation feels more empowered to be to be more vocal about their disagreements. And so it's not as sort of in the closet. But I totally agree with you that we're at a really difficult point, and yes, the horse is miles away and the barn is burnt down, and it's too late. Not too late. It's not too late. We're behind the game. We're behind, and we need to. I don't know how we're going to catch up, but
So
yeah.
I want to pose a question to both of you because of this metaphor of the barn and the time horizon and whatnot. Just to play a little bit of devil's advocate. If the horse has run so far off and had its own foals, like at what point do we say okay, and the barn, like we're rebuilding, but we're not rebuilding to chase that 30%, but to figure out what we're doing with the 70. And like, how do we not is not too late for some people? It's not too late for the whole Jewish people. It's like we've had these moments of falling off from our general consensus of the community. It's not the first time. It's always painful. It's not something we advocate for, God forbid, or push for. But there are moments. It's a moment of inflection, saying, you know what, like there are things that are for the sake of preservation, which is also a value. That we are not, we just, there is only so much that we can do. The door will always be open, right? But we're not going to chase you to bring you back to this farm, this barn that we're building. We'll build it better this time. We'll be more mindful. We'll figure out how we can kind of eliminate that moving forward. But if you're out there, like, we can't send out cowboys to, whatever. I don't know why we're using this too many analogies that I don't feel comfortable kind of developing. But you know what I mean? Like, we're not gonna, gotta.
So my greater concern is not the whatever that percentage is that we don't know who are of young people who are saying they're anti-Zionist, because I'm not actually sure that they're so clear on that, and I actually think that there is this is only anecdotal, right? But and maybe it's also hope, right? That there's still a desire to engage, right? They are still Jews. They're identifying as Jews. They want to be part of a Jewish community. They want to have these conversations in meaningful ways. My bigger concern is the people who are closing the doors on those conversations with those young people and saying that, like, Ahavat Yisrael is the only way to do it, and we have to be advocators, no matter what. And because right now, those are the people who hold the purse strings and are leading our institutions and are shutting out and pushing those young people away. So I think that's yeah. Go on.
I think you're bang on, Laura. I think I don't think it's a case of running after or not running after, but allow them to speak and to have conversations. Because at the end of the day, I'm going back to the barn. We need to decide: is this a Jewish barn or is this a Zionist barn? And does a Jewish home have to be a Zionist home? Is it possible to be a Jew and a member of the Jewish community who thinks that Israel is a bad idea? And that's something that the Jewish community's got to get really, really clear on before it starts deciding these are the mitnagdim or whoever, and we're ruling them out of our world. I'm not sure that's something what I want to do.
Yeah, I want to push you a little bit more. Not because I agree with you. I just want to make sure that I'm agreeing with you for the right reasons. But I think, but the counter argument would be like, no one's saying to write them off necessarily, right? But is there like this, like there's a strategic question, like what is going to attract people into this, to the Jewish enterprise, right? What works, like psychologically, right? Are we incentivizing the wrong type of behaviors by doing so on a greater scale? It pays to be a critic because I'll get more attention, right? And those who are bought in, like, we'll take them for granted. And then what does that do to the whole dynamic? That's part of it. I'm trying to think about, be mindful of. And of course, not to write anybody off, but like to be clear about what are the things that we care about I tend to agree with Robbie, like this, the distinction Zionist and Jewish. I fall squarely into the Jewish side of things. If I would, if the choice, if I have to make a statement or whatever. But the point being that even within that, let's use, like, we like to talk about the historic World Zionist Congress. There were anti-Zionist Jews that were in the thing, right? And they were whatever. But there was the time was obviously very, very different. There wasn't a state. It was much easier to argue against. But
Right.
the goal was self-preservation, and the question was, how do we achieve that, right? And so now the question of self-preservation isn't one that we can kind of mitigate. So Zionism, so we also have to update what we mean when we say Zionism, Robbie, to your point, right? It's not no
Right.
longer like, there's this type and that type. Yes, nachon, but they all were working towards the same thing. It was about, preserving and building, a continued thriving Jewish community and what that would take. And now that we have this vessel, this thing, what does that look like? And how can we then figure out the boundaries of these conversations without, what is it like? Okay, so what does it mean to be Jewish? If you reject Israel, you reject God the way we talk about God, you reject the language, you reject, so what are we? So what is aside from the the ish and the Jewish, like, what do we agree on, right? Like, what are those
Right.
things? Or Avram Infeld's, the stool, all that stuff. So I'm going to push you, like, saying, yes, I don't want to push anybody out of the conversation,
Right.
but how do we, and not to, like, part, like, splitting hairs of, like, the boundaries, who's in is out, but, like, Israel education, if the goal is yediyah, if we want people to be involved and engaged in this conversation moving forward, and if this is what we're dealing with, how do we kind of work in that direction?
I think we have to actually define what we mean, right? Like, I appreciate the question. I think it's a fascinating question. Is it possible to be a Jewish home and not a Zionist home? Like, well, let's just define that. What do we mean by Zionist home and what do we mean by Jewish home, right? Because how each of us defines that might actually be completely different, right? So I think part of it is actually having the conversations about what do we mean by Zionist and what do we mean by Jewish, and are they separate? Right? I mean, that's a lot of the conversation that I've had to have over the last 19 months with my non-Jewish friends when they say to me, "Are you a Zionist, Rabbi Laura?" And I have to say, well, it depends on how you're defining Zionist, right? Because even our Zionists define Zionism differently, right? So I think it's about having the conversation, beginning with one way to do it is to begin by talking about what do we mean by Jewish and what do we mean by Zionist.
Robbie,
I got like 4 thoughts.
go for it.
One is, recently, Abby and I, we started doing these intergenerational arguments about Israel. And we would gather, we were in this San Francisco area mostly, and we were gathering intergeneration, basically under 30 and over 45 were the sort of 2 age groups. And we found, so on that one, there was something interesting because these were people who had chosen to come to these conversations. All right. So we weren't actually getting the rejectionists. Okay. We were getting, and the main thing that happened in those arguments over what's going on in Israel is how relieved people felt when they left the room. Because they were able to have nuanced conversations and able to have arguments and differences about the place that they already feel connected to. And it may well be that we're still talking that that's the majority of people who are connected to Israel. And those people, especially now, need to be given space to address their questions about the place. Because there's no way, even the person who is most in love with Israel doesn't have questions going in one direction or another direction.
Mm-hmm.
And our Israel education needs to have space for that. Because I think that also this is point 2, Israel education needs to give respect to the learner. I personally don't believe you need to do everything that the learner wants, but you need to at least give them respect, which also applies to talking to the folks, if we're saying the rejectionists, or either the rejectionists of Israel as a Jewish state or the rejectionists of Israel as a democratic state. Either of those extremes that I would say are not Zionist. Give them respect that they are human beings, and that they have thoughts and they think things through, and that their thoughts can be part of our conversation, even though they may not necessarily be part of my core curriculum, right? The third thing is another sort of thing that I once tried out, and I think it's probably still of value, is that what if your curriculum was asking the question, why is Israel important to the Jewish people? Right? Or why is Israel of great significance to the Jewish people, right? Good or bad, look at the numbers. We're still talking around about 80% of Jews around the world say that Israel is extremely important to them. Why? And then I, as a learner, can assess whether the reasons they think it's important are the reasons that I agree with, that it speaks to me, but that it's a question mark, almost like it's a historical or it's a mystery.
Right.
And the fourth idea was something that I gained from a friend of mine, Jonathan Kessler, from an organization called Heart of the Nation, where he talks about having people fall in love with the problem. I think his take is that young people want to fix things. They feel that the world needs to be made better. And the moment you get someone to fall in love with the problem, you have to learn more about it. If you see Israel as a problem, fall in love with that problem. What are you going to do about it? How are we going to solve this? What's going to emerge from it? If you really want there to be peace, so which side are you on, and how are you going to achieve? And I think that there's something interesting in that as well.
I think it's interesting that you raised the question about why is Israel important to the Jewish people, because that has been the perennially missing answer in Israel education, right? Barry Chazan writes about this multiple times, that, right, we tell learners that Israel is important, but we don't tell them why. And to be able to answer that either individually or collectively as an institution, right? I've said this to synagogues that I've worked with or schools that I've worked with. You have to answer this question for yourself. Why Israel education is important for your learners? What's the answer you want to give to them? And then also appreciate the fact that we have different answers around the Jewish community to that answer.
That's the cool way of getting away. Yeah, it's cool if you can get away with not having an answer if you just say, yeah, why is it?
Yeah.
Let's end with that. I think this will be the Laura. This is, I mean, you can thank yourself for this. But jokes aside, I do think it's important. And look, I think that, first of all, thank you. This has been incredibly enriching and stimulating, and there's so much more we can talk, but we are at an hour plus, and I want to be mindful of your time and everything. So thank you. So I do want to end with this question, because I think it's important, as we're thinking about this, I do think that Israel has taken a theological place in the American Jewish community psyche, that and this is why you can't ask it, because you can be a heretic around God and belief and practice and all that stuff. But you can also be a heretic on this. I think people are afraid this is like the rise of the Israel committees and shuls. There's a whole things that happened in America that we didn't cover, but that's my sense of this whole thing. So I do want to bring it back. And I think this will be an interesting kind of way for people to tie into this conversation also, and have them think about it, is really like, why do you, Robbie, why do you think it's important? And Laura, why do you think it's important? Why is Israel important in someone's Jewish identity?
Oh, damn, you got me to speak first.
Yes, I did.
Why is Israel important in Jewish people's identity? What is it, that line about the unexamined life? If I had my druthers, I would say that the main goal of Israel education is to make sure every Jew seriously contemplates making aliyah. even if they never do, to contemplate the possibility of a different way of being a Jew in the world. I think that Israel offers that opportunity in all sorts of different ways, both geography, sociology, theology, ideology, to imagine, to understand that the way I am Jewish is not the only way that I can be Jewish. And in particular in the United States, to be a prosperous but now slightly fragile minority is not the only way to be a Jew. So I think that's a valuable why. To contemplate how your life might be different.
Laura.
That's my answer for today.
It's good. For today, it's good. We'll take it.
I love that. I appreciate and love that answer, Robbie. And you actually are very close to my answer, which is, right, not only, right, I said earlier that part of my why as a Jewish educator and as a rabbi is because Judaism offers guidance for how we live our lives. And I think Israel is part of that puzzle. And it is about figuring out who we are as Jews and how we want to live our lives in the world. And we each have to, whether it's the question of Aliyah or the question of Hebrew fluency or the question of, I don't know, just going on a visit, and figuring out what is it that informs who I am as a Jew in the world and in relationship with other Jews in the world and in relationship with the rest of the world.
Thank you. Okay, so with that, we're going to wrap up this episode. Thank you, Laura, so much for joining us. Robbie, thank you so much. I had a lot of fun. I learned a lot, really, and I truly appreciate everything that you're doing in the field of Israel and Jewish education for the community and wherever you're meeting your students and learners. Really, I appreciate it, and I appreciate you joining us. So thank you, and I look forward for future conversations.
That was great. Lovely spending
Lovely to
time
be
with
with
the two
you.
of you.